fifth graders, to another science test review. Today we're going to be talking about vascular plants. So hopefully you're at home right now, or you're driving in your car, you have your notebook out or your science book and you're following along, okay? So right off the bat, you need to see here that vascular plants are broken up into two main categories. We talked about this a little bit when we looked at animals, how they're broken up into two main categories: backbone, vertebrate, and invertebrate, no backbone. We talked about this when we looked at plants, how we have vascular and non-vascular plants. The reason scientists like to classify plants, animals, in this case vascular plants, is that it helps to study them. Scientists like to be able to look at similar characteristics and then put them into groups. For example, me as a teacher, if I were to categorize or classify my classroom by two main categories based upon similar characteristics, I would maybe put chicos on one side, dudes, and chicas on another. Why? Because those are the two main categories in my class based upon their characteristics. Okay, dudes tend to look one way and girls tend to look another way. Okay, so the scientists do the exact same thing. They look at vascular plants and they go, what do all of these mainly have in common? Well, all of these plants over here are seedless, whereas in all of these plants on the other side have seeds. Okay, so let's go over a couple examples of seedless plants and how they are formed, because they are formed in two different ways. Seedless plants are, here's some examples. We have a fern and a horsetail. Typically these seedless plants are kind of ugly. They're those nasty plants that you see when you're walking around and you're like, ew, what's that? You know, they're not very nice. You wouldn't want to give a seedless plant to somebody on Valentine's Day. They're probably not going to, find that very good. All right? Now, how are seedless plants formed? Seedless plants are formed by what's called a spore. Now, a spore is a single cell, and inside that cell, there is actually a whole plant just waiting to come alive. Okay? How does it come alive? First of all, the spore is kind of hanging out on the seedless plant. There's a whole bunch of spores hanging out all over the tips of these plants. Then a big gust of breeze comes by, blows the spore off. It may travel a mile down the road because of the breeze, and then it lands. Hopefully, if the spore lands in some good, rich soil, a new plant is going to sprout out of that spore. Okay? Now, let's also look at here. A scientific term for a plant that does not have any flowers. Seedless plants typically do not have any flowers. Okay, that's why I put them over here. A science term for a plant that does not have flowers is called a gymnosperm. And the trick that I gave you was the word no here. In the word gymnosperm is the word no. So that's going to help us remember that there are no flowers if it's a gymnosperm. Okay? So this, once again, is seedless. They're kind of ugly. You have fern, horsetail. There's no flowers. That's why they're gymnosperms, no flowers. And they form from what are called spores. Now let's swing over to this other side here, and we are talking about seed plants. These are the nice ones. They tend to have flowers all over them. They're colorful. They're bright. These are the kind of ones that you'd want to give to somebody for Valentine's Day. You can see an evergreen here. It's like what you would put in your living room maybe during the holidays. Let's look at the inside of one of these angiosperms, or a seed plant that does have flowers. You can see here we have pollen. These are the things that are at the tips of the flower. The pistil is the long thing in the middle of the flower. And inside of the pistil you have an ovary, and then inside of the ovary you have what are called eggs. Okay, now let's talk about how a new seed plant forms. The seedless plant, a new one starts by a spore. A seed plant starts in a different way, by a seed. How does that happen? Okay, so let's go ahead and look over here at pollination. This is how a new seed plant comes into being. Okay, first of all, the bee looks at the colorful flower, because it's like, whoa, it's like checking it out. Look at that cute little pink outfit that flower has on. So the bee's like, oh, it cruises over and it lands on that beautiful pink flower. Okay? Now, while the bee is like checking out the flower, maybe getting a little grub, a little bit of pollen lands on the back of the bee. The bee may not even know what's going on. It's like, what's that? I don't know. Doesn't even really care. So the bee picks up the pollen and it lands on its back. Then the bee starts checking out another flower. It's like, oh man, look at that yellow one over there. Dang, that flower's kind of a cutie. So then it takes off and checks out another flower here in step number 3. It lands on another flower. Oh, actually, what does this one say? Bee flies away with pollen on its back. Okay, so we already did 3. Now we're looking at 4. It lands on the pink flower. It's got the pollen on its back. And what happens is the pollen that's on the bee's back, it sometimes gets down and it goes down the pistil. It goes through the ovary. And the pollen mixes in with the egg. You can use your imagination there. And a new seed forms. Okay, so you have an egg, which is inside the ovary, plus the pollen that came from the bee's back, which was on another flower, goes down the pistil. You have egg plus pollen equals a seed. So now inside of this flower you have seeds. How does a new plant start from this whole process? Basically what happens, we already talked about step 5. The pollen goes down and it gets inside the ovary and it mixes with the egg. In step 6 here, the plant dies, and then the seeds that were in the plant go into the soil, because as you can see here in the picture, the plant dies and it falls over and it goes into the soil. So now the seed ends up in the soil, and then as long as you have the right conditions like water and sun and that sort of thing, a new plant is going to start from the seed. Woo! Okay, so vascular plants, once again, we have seedless and seed. Seedless plants form from spores, and they're called gymnosperms because they have no flowers. And on the other side, you have seed plants, and they are called angiosperms, evergreen, and flowers. And they form by seeds, not by spores. I think that's it. We talked about pollination. We talked about all the good stuff here. Hopefully you have enjoyed this science test review, and I look forward to seeing you guys in class.